Please join me in welcoming to the podium Joan Lawson.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with this group, and this group in particular, because you are filled also with enthusiasm for the church and a good deal of knowledge. And in fact, so much knowledge, it's a bit daunting to speak to you with any sort of a topic, but I'm very excited to be here with this particular group, First Friday Club of Greater Youngstown, to talk about what's new and what's old in the archives of the diocese. Let's begin. It is a bit daunting to talk to you because I know so many of you know some of this. I hope all of you don't know all of it and that I'm able to bring something new to you today. But I think many of you know that the diocese was erected on May 15th of 1943. We just celebrated our 80th anniversary. And this is the papal bull that erects the Diocese of Youngstown, Pope Pius XII. So that's an exciting thing in the archives of the diocese, this parchment paper, and we have it framed, and it's currently on exhibit. It's usually in the bishop's conference room. But when we were erected, Pius XII erected us, and we have this coat of arms, which is really interesting. I guess I'll use the pointer instead of my finger. There it is. The dove represents our patron saint, Columba. In Irish, he is Columcille, which means dove of the church. And so the dove, we always calls to mind the Holy Spirit, but it also calls to mind for us Columcille, the dove of the church, our patron saint. Then the wavy line represents the rivers that flow through our 6 counties that were so important for our economy. And at the bottom is an anvil, which represents the metallurgical industries that also were very important in our diocese when we were erected. And I find it really interesting that they also put the projectile points, the arrowheads, to represent the native people who occupied and passed through the area of northeastern Ohio. So if you go to conferences now, you'll often hear something called a land acknowledgement, and the host will say, we are on the land of such and such a people. But I think it's really, that's in 2023. I think it's amazing that in 1943 that the diocese had the grace to say we are on land that has been occupied a very long time and will represent the people who have come before us. So there we are, May 15th, 1943. We are a new diocese, the Diocese of Youngstown. Oops, sorry. For the first 30 years of the diocese, we had to start up. We had to have all of the official decrees and papers required by a diocese. And after about 30 years, it became very important in the early 1970s because we were looking forward to celebrating the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Now, some of you would have been kids at the time, but how many of you remember the American Revolution bicentennial in 1976? It was a big deal. We all knew it was the bicentennial of the Revolution. In just a couple of years, we're going to have the 250th anniversary of that, and we'll be gearing up for that. But the bishops, no less than the rest of us, the National Council of Catholic Bishops, were gearing up for it, and they put out a document on ecclesiastical archives in 1974. And it was the committee for the bicentennial. The bishops had a committee for the bicentennial. And they greatly encouraged all bishops to make sure that your ecclesiastical archives are in order. Make sure that your papers are being preserved in professional ways by professional archivists. And in our diocese, our chancellor at the time, Monsignor, he was Father James Clark at the time. We're used to calling him Monsignor now. And Bishop Malone executed this very creative agreement because while the whole country was looking back toward history and was getting very excited about history. In Ohio, there were established a number of what were called American History Research Centers. They were established all over Ohio. And one of them was at Kent State University. That in 1974, that would have been the brand new library at Kent State. And they were at American History Research Center and within the boundaries of our diocese. And so Bishop Malone and Father Clark established this creative agreement that the university would house and make available our archives and treat them professionally, archivally, but that we would still retain ownership. And it was a really big deal. It was written up in National Archives publications. This religious entity with this historically significant material is housing them in a state institution and making them available. It was great. And there was a lot of excitement about it. But then, as 1976 passed, and we got into the late 70s, attention on our history waned, enthusiasm waned, personnel at the university changed, priorities changed, and after a time, the Kent State said, we cannot take any more of your records. So, the records that are at Kent State are still there. They are still housing them. They have been looked after by professional archivists in archivally appropriate materials in a controlled environment for temperature and humidity. But that's just about the first 30 years of our records. Since then, our records have been housed at this familiar place, at the Chancery for the Diocese of Youngstown. And chancellors, and I know we have one past chancellor here, Monsignor Rhodes is here, yes? There, right there. Monsignor Clark isn't here, is he? Any other past chancellors? Thank you, Monsignor Rhodes. Chancellors are always in charge of archives. That's the way canon law is set up. The chancellor is in charge of the archives. But for instance, Monsignor Rhodes's time, in Father Clark's time, chancellors had a whole lot to do, and so archives was just part of their responsibility. So they were keeping what they needed to keep, but they were putting it in the basements of all of our buildings. And I'm here to tell you that basements are bad places to keep paper-based records. Everybody's nodding their heads. You know, basements and attics are bad places for paper-based records. So we have preserved them, but we don't have the detailed inventory of them. We don't have what we call intellectual control over them. We don't know. We know roughly what we have, but we don't know exactly what we have. And being in a basement isn't good. So when Bishop Bonner became our bishop, he turned his attention to the archives. And he appointed me as archivist and has been leading ever since toward accomplishing goals and dreams for an archive over which we have intellectual control, so we know to the detail of what we have, and physical control so that it is no longer in a basement, and we'll be moving there to a place that has temperature and humidity that are kept within the tight ranges that you need to assure that paper-based materials are preserved. So with that, the intellectual control and the physical control, we also want to do education, and it all is about evangelization, because it's all about telling our story, about how we have contributed to the spiritual and the temporal well-being of the communities in which we have lived out our gospel lives and ministries. So, just this year, we approved the mission of the archives of the Diocese of Youngstown, and I won't read it all to you, but it's basically to collect, preserve, and make available the permanent and official records. And it's the diocese as an entity, but also the people, parishes, schools, churches, institutions, associations that make up our life together as Catholics in northeastern Ohio. So we have that approved. And the bishop has also led in adding to the archive staff, last summer and this summer, he appointed 2 seminarians, Craig Zybert and Daniel LaPaula. And if you've run into any of them in any of your parishes, you'll know that they're wonderful young men. They have provided the energy and the enthusiasm and the pure joy in helping out with whatever project was presenting itself last summer and this summer. In November of last year, the bishop approved the hiring of an assistant archivist, and we were very blessed to have a young woman, Hannah Klasik, who has her master's in history with a specialty in applied history, and she already had experience in religious archives. And she has been diligently working in achieving that intellectual and physical control, knowing what we have and having it housed properly. And this April, the bishop further expanded our staff by appointing Father Bob Lanterman, who is here, wave to all, who has brought knowledge, who has brought his knowledge and skills and has given us a boost as we collect and preserve and exhibit materials. So it's been a wonderful staff to work with, and we're well on our way toward achieving a functioning archive, toward preserving our history. So, what is the history that we're preserving? We tend, when we look at our present time and when we look at past times, we tend to think, oh, I mean, how many of you think the times we're living in, man, we are in such trouble. We're going to hell in a handbasket. Everybody in every generation thinks that. And we look to the past and we think, oh, it was way better back then. Those previous decades, they were way better. But those are rose-colored glasses. 1943 was not an ideal time in American history. It was a time of war, and therefore it was a time of anxiety and a time of grief as people sent their sons and husbands and brothers off to fight. It was a time of shortages. We had rationing. It was just a generally anxious time. And when Bishop James A. McFadden was our first bishop, he had this book published, The March of the Eucharist. And he looked back at that time and he said some beautiful things. He said the establishment of a diocese during the exigencies of a global war that caused shortages, that caused, including of priests and sisters who went off to serve God and country, that it was a fraught time. But it was a beautiful time because he said it might have been an extremely difficult task, but in reality, it was an undertaking of love. And he says, love begets love. And the arduous burdens were confronted were greatly lightened to the generosity, loyal, and sincere cooperation of the members of the diocese. Now, I don't have the impression from what's been handed down and from writings and even from photographs that James A. McFadden was a particularly humble man. But he has the grace to acknowledge that this was all accomplished through the generosity of the people of the Diocese of Youngstown. So he says, ceaseless toiling in the vineyard of the Lord is a source of deep spiritual satisfaction. So it wasn't easy, but it was done. And it was done in this difficult time. At the same time, it was a time of economic flourishing because our 6 counties were instrumental in providing war material. The steel production in Youngstown, Warren, Canton, Massillon, the arsenal at Ravenna were all geared toward production for the war. So it was a time of booming. This is an image of Youngstown taken from the south side of the Mahoning River looking toward the north side. Oops. I'm a little jumpy on this. Okay. This is St. Columba Cathedral. So you can see, there's a bank building, there are office buildings, industrial buildings, and a really great dominant building on the landscape is St. Columba Cathedral. That's the 2 spires of it. That is the the cathedral that Bishop McFadden came to. This is the interior of that cathedral. It was an elaborate Gothic building. I think most of you are too young to really remember that, but it was high Gothic. When it was being built, the pastor of St. Columba was Father Mears, and it said that he was often quoted as saying he was building a cathedral. And whether he was referring to how elaborate and high Gothic it was, or that he was anticipating that this fast-growing city of Youngstown would be the seat of a bishop, we don't know, because it was more than 40 years before we were established as a diocese, but he certainly showed some prescience in saying, I am building a cathedral. St. Columba didn't begin that way. This was the third church that St. Columba built. Whoops. When St. Columba began as a parish was 1847, and this is Youngstown in 1846. You can see the Mahoning River, and this is the Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal, which ran through downtown. And then this is the accumulation of the town. Residences, a couple of churches. It was in 1840, it was a village of about 600 people. Okay, 1840, 600 people. 1850, 2,800 people. So in 10 years, you have more than quadrupled the population of a village gathered around a river. And of course, part of that quadrupling would be Catholics. So by 1847, we needed a parish here, and it was primarily made up of Irish immigrants, and so it was named after a great Irish saint, Columba, or at the time, Columkill. But it is just astonishing to think of quadrupling of a population in 10 years. Well, it stayed that way up until about the Civil War. St. Columba builds a parish church, but we don't have an image of what that looked like. But within 20 years, by 1870, we had 8,000 people living in Youngstown. 28,000 in 1850, 8,000 in 1870. So by that time, St. Columba within 20 years, had outgrown its first parish church. So they built this lovely brick church with some great spires. So you can imagine how that would dominate the landscape. This was on Wood Street, just about a block east and on the south side of Wood Street, from where the cathedral is now. They built that in 1867. They built this wonderful monumental brick school in 1871. And in 1874, to that wonderful school come the wonderful Ursuline sisters. Where are the Ursuline sisters? Yeah. This building could be seen for miles. As it was on Rayan Avenue, it's where the parking lot for the Chancery is now. It sat on that corner, on the southwest corner of Rayan and Elm. So St. Columba, in this growing city, in this city that's practically exponentially growing, they play a great role in providing places of worship and providing education and in fitting in with this splendid growing city. So in 1897, this Gothic church is open for worship. It's not quite completed. It'll be consecrated in 1903. But that's exactly where our cathedral is today. This is the corner of Elm and Wood Street. And then next to it was the rectory, which is also a pretty splendid residence. So it was right next to it, was really just feet from the the church. I included the next slide so that you can see, first of all, how dominant that building was. And this is taken from downtown. So you're down the hill, downtown on the railroad tracks. And you can see that they kept the old church at the same time. So you can see their relative. This is exactly where our present cathedral is, and then it was across the street and down a block. They kept that for quite some time until 1940. They used it for different purposes. So this is and sorry, these spires, these copper spires go on in 1927. So about a generation after the original building, they put those great big spires on. So that's the church that James A. McFadden comes to. And there you can see Bishop McFadden looking, as I say, not particularly humble. And the copper-spired, great Gothic church he came to, and there is St. Columba School. So you can see, even compared, it's like a block down, even compared to the church. It was a monumental building. That's the church Bishop McFadden comes to. And then, that's 1943, and then, I think many of you will know this, I'm keeping you in suspense. It may be that there we go. Then fire. September 2nd, 1954, a catastrophic fire. How many of you have heard the story of that fire? A good many of you, but not all of you. I heard it from my parents because they lived on the south side, not far from there, and they could see it. They could see the flames. They were newly married. So this is nothing else you can say about it, but that this is a catastrophe. Bishop Emmett Walsh is bishop at the time. And I set all this up because I want to talk to you about this brochure called From the Flames of Disaster. And this isn't the real brochure. The real brochure is too valuable to bring. This is a facsimile that we made of it. It's just 3 sheets of paper, so it's 12 pages. And it starts with From the Flames of Disaster. So there's no sugarcoating of it. A leader will tell you what's really going on, and Emmett Walsh said, this was a disaster. Our cathedral burned. But because he was a Catholic leader, he reminds us that there is always hope to be found. And so in this booklet, which I find particularly inspiring, he writes a beautiful letter. And so that's like this page. So there's a portrait of Bishop Walsh and the letter that he wrote. He says that we need to build a new cathedral, and it needs to be splendid, is his word, splendid. And why do we need to build a splendid cathedral? He says because it is an obligation to our holy heritage. I love that phrase, an obligation to our holy heritage, that we keep up beauty in our communities. And then he goes on to say something that I find very inspiring. He says, we need to build this new cathedral. He says, our kindred of an earlier generation, poorer in numbers and resources, did so. What made their striking accomplishment possible? Their sturdy faith, their soaring love of God, and their Christian willingness to sacrifice. I find that sentence just so inspiring. Sturdy faith, soaring love of God, and Christian willingness to sacrifice. And he says, because he knows rose-colored glasses aren't useful, he says, those virtues were present in them, and they are present in us. We do not now live in a worse age than they were in. Those virtues are present in us, and we will match their achievement. So That's something to hold on to. Sturdy faith, soaring love of God, willingness to sacrifice. There are other things in this brochure. I love the center spread. What flames have destroyed, faith will rebuild. So again, that gospel reminder that we don't stay in disaster. We don't stay in destruction. We come out of that because of our faith. So that's all inspiring. And then he gets real practical. He says, here's what we need. And do you know that you can make a tax-deductible donation? And it's really interesting because this is, 1957. The income levels start at $2,000. If you make this contribution and you make $2,000 a year, this is what you can deduct on your taxes. And figure roughly $2,000 in 1957 would be about $22,000 now, so 10 times plus a bit. But that would be a sacrifice. Imagine if you were trying to keep your family together now at $22,000 to make a sacrifice to build this cathedral. So this is one little booklet. And you might have been thinking, oh, well, of course you have that booklet. It was in the St. Columba Archives, right? Or it was in the Diocesan Archives, right? No, it wasn't. I'll tell you where it was. It was in the St. Stanislaus Archives. It's not in the Diocesan Archives, as far as we know, and it's definitely not in the St. Columba Archives. This is the kind of thing that would have gone to your house, and you either looked at it and said, okay, I'll make that tax-deductible contribution, or you would have said, no, I can't do that, and thrown it away. It's not the kind of thing people keep. We have about 17 of these that people keep giving us because everyone knew this is important. I mean, you can tell that's an important book. But this, it's a brochure. It's for fundraising. I don't need to keep that. But look at how much we get from it. An idea of what life was like. An idea of what inspired the people at the time. So this is the kind of thing that you can help with. We were lucky that we found this in the St. Stanislaus Archives. My mom, bless her, saved a lot of stuff. And she saved a lot of church stuff. And she always told me about the fire, and it was important in her psyche that she had witnessed that, and my dad had gone down to see if he could help. And so this would have been important to my parents, but my mom didn't save this. She threw it away. So a lot of people didn't save it. So it was just by grace that it was saved at the St. Stanislaus Archives. So this is where you can come in. Look for things. Encourage people in your parishes to say, you know what, our history is important. And that thing that maybe you think, oh, everybody has that, they might not have that. We might not have that. You can look around your houses. You can encourage people in your parishes. You know, there are people who just are simply not history-minded. I know it's hard to believe, but it does happen. But you can start to encourage people to look with eyes of preserving our history, that we need to tell our story. So if someone says, we don't need these old bulletins, we're going to throw our bulletins away, you can say, we do need our bulletins. Our bulletins tell our story, or our photographs tell our story, or our blueprints tell our story, or our brochures tell our story. So we want to tell the full story of Catholicism in the 6 counties of our diocese. The diocesan offices were good at preserving the essential documents that show all of our official acts, but telling a rounded story from everyone's point of view, we need help with that, and that's where you can help. Remind people to look with different eyes. So if you do, and actually somebody did give me a donation before I started to talk. If you do give a donation to the Diocesan Archives, what would your treasure join? Well, we know that the greatest treasure of the church are her people. In fact, the patron saint of archivists, yes, we have a patron saint, is St. Lawrence. And he is the saint who was said to have been put to the sword and said, bring all your treasures to the captors. And he went out and gathered all the church treasures, and he went out and gathered the people and brought a crowd of people, because that's the real treasure of the church, is all of us. But I think next to that, the great treasure is the sacramental records of our people, how our people over time celebrated God's great presence in their lives. And our sacramental records, because, okay, our diocese is only 80 years old as an entity, but our parishes go back 200 years, go back to 1817. In Dungannon and in Canton, our first parishes begin. And so I just think this is a beautiful page. At 1830, beginning of the sacramental records of St. Philip in Dungannon. We have, in the Diocesan Archives, we have the sacramental records of parishes that are closed. If your parish merged with another parish, the sacramental records went along with the merger. So whatever the new merged parish is, they hold the sacramental records for all the parishes that went into the merger. But if the church was closed, then the Diocesan Archives has that. So we have the sacramental records from St. Augustine in Youngstown, which closed in the 1950s. St. Anne in Briar Hill and St. Joseph's downtown Youngstown, which closed in the 1960s. St. Francis on the east side of Youngstown, which closed in the 1970s. We have St. Patrick's Salineville, which closed in the 1990s. And then Sacred Heart in Canton, St. Elizabeth in Camel, St. Stanislaus, which closed more recently. But if the parishes merge, the records go to the merged parishes. But sacramental records are a large part of our work, because people want them and need them for various reasons. And so anybody who works in a parish knows that you get a lot of call for sacramental records, and we get a lot of calls for that. So that makes up a good bit of our work. So those sacramental records are real treasures. We also have wonderful photographs, and I just brought some that I think are captivating. So photographs of sacraments. You know, that is a 1960s wedding. You can tell from 3 miles off. That's the 1960s. And the kids at the baptismal font, how much joy they show in being able to be baptized, and they'll be able to remember their baptism. So those photographs really tell a story. We were able to do an exhibit in the Diocesan Conference Room for the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the diocese in June, on June 25th. And part of what we put in there was this thing that really captivated a lot of people. That is an electric communion wafer iron. And that came out of St. Stanislaus. And it just happened. I was looking for something else, which is often a good way to find something that you didn't know you were looking for. I happened to find this photograph of an Ursuline sister making communion wafers in the very kind of iron that is. So we could put those two things together. And all I know is that if that was me, my fingers would be burnt all the time. But there she is pulling the wafer out of there. So that's kind of, a lot of people remarked on it because they never thought about how were they made, in 1920, how were communion wafers made. Great photographs. You can tell how happy these girls are to be playing in the band from schools. This is girls, again, you can tell, 1960s, look at that bubble cut. This is from Villa Maria, and somebody at my table was talking about Villa Maria High School. Anybody here went to Villa? Went to the Villa? Oh, wow, okay. So we have memories of schools. Parish work. This is on the left in Canton, and on the right at St. Stanislaus, of women assembling clothing and shoes to be sent over to Europe after World War II to help the displaced persons. So that kind of Oh my gosh! Which one? Canton or Youngstown? St. Stan's. Oh my gosh! This one here. It looks like Selesky. Isn't that something? No, that's wonderful. Wow. That is great. Connections. That is great. This might bring a tear to some. Oh, we're waiting. Okay. This might bring a tear to some other eyes. It's the Ursuline Moody football booklet from 1959. 1959. Sports have been very important to our people. And one more St. Stanislaus piece. This trophy was a national baseball trophy won by St. Stanislaus amateur team. They won a national baseball trophy in 1933. So in the archives is evidence of all kinds of the life of Catholics in Northeastern Ohio. From the ordinary, where would we be without spaghetti dinners? Is this anyone's great-grandma? These women are from Canton. No, I brought the spaghetti dinner picture. And you know, you think about all of our parishes in all of the years, we have to have had tens of thousands of spaghetti dinners. But it's wonderful to have a picture like that. And look at how joyful they are to be making the pasta. So that's an ordinary moment, but it's wonderful to have it preserved. To an extraordinary moment. The efforts of Bishop Malone and other religious leaders in the area to save our valley, supporting an employee-owned steel mill. It didn't happen that we got an employee-owned steel mill, but the spirit of cooperation among all of our religious congregations and the idea that they brought about inspired others in other areas of the country. And so that's an extraordinary moment that we have a collection of materials on that's of interest to anyone in the entire country that save our valley. All of these things help to tell our story. We can tell our story in person, like now, or online. I mentioned that we were able to have that 80th anniversary exhibit. And if anybody follows the diocese on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, Cindy Case has put up little moments from that exhibit so that, you know, there were about 100 people who got to see it, but now more people can see it because it's online. So we need to be thinking along these lines, that our history is important, that over time we have contributed to the well-being of the communities in which we have lived out the gospel. Encourage people in your parish to remember that a healthy community has a healthy memory. A person without a memory can't be healthy. A community without a memory can't be healthy either. Not that we live in the past, not that even that we glorify the past, but we need to know what happened. And if we don't, it's to our detriment. So our people have had a sturdy faith, a soaring love of God, and a willingness to sacrifice. And we can't lose their stories. We need to remember them. And may we all do our part in furthering the story of the church in our communities. Thank you. Now I'll take questions and Monsignor Rose can answer them.
Okay, Joan, I was really hearing your call for memorabilia. what would you suggest as a process before you get inundated by a bunch of stuff?
Well, I don't mind being inundated. So if you think it's something, even if you have the 18th copy of the March Review of the Eucharist, I'll probably take it, because we can use them for educational things. But just give me a call at the diocese or email me at jlawson@youngstowndiocese.org, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
I often wondered why, when we rebuilt the cathedral, that we didn't rebuild it in the fashion that it was.
I think it's because he wanted it to be splendid, and splendid in 1957 wasn't that. Splendid was what we have now. See, you're shaking your head, and there are a lot of people who don't like our cathedral, but it is a splendid example of ecclesiastical architecture in 1957. And you see it echoed in other areas of the country. We keep seeing mid-century images of other cathedrals or other churches, and we'll look and we'll say, wow, that was after ours, that was after ours. You'll see the mural of the Blessed Mother with the saints around it. You'll see that echoed in other churches in the country. So it is a very fine example of church architecture in the mid-1950s.
I'm from New York, and St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Yeah.
When I look at the old pictures of St. Columba, that reminds me of home.
Right, yeah.
Thank you, Joan, for your presentation. A historical question that I have would be whether it's important today or not. What caused the fire in 1954?
Oh, thanks, I forgot to say that. It was a lightning strike. And it started in the roof, and it smoldered in the roof for a while, so no one could see it. So it was already smoldering by the time anyone saw it. And it was tremendous response on the part of the firefighters, and a lot of ordinary people did rush down there to see if they could help. And Monsignor Culp isn't here, is he? Monsignor Culp was there at the time, and he was part of the effort to get materials out of there. So it was an heroic effort to save what they could, but they couldn't save the building. And then interestingly, that rectory that I showed you that was right next to it, it was cheek to jowl next to it, the firefighters were able to keep the brand new school building, which had opened in 1952, behind the cathedral, and the rectory next to it. They were able to save those. But what destroyed the rectory was, I think it was the following month, when they were demolishing the ruined cathedral, debris fell into the rectory. And so that ruined the rectory. As a matter of fact, it fell into the bedroom of Father James W. Malone. He wasn't hurt, obviously.
Because some parts of our diocese at present were originally a part of the Cleveland Diocese.
All of it.
All of it, okay. Do we have all that even though it was in the Cleveland Diocese, or do they have some copies of what was first in their diocese?
That's a really good question, and it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. So actually when our parishes started in 1817, there wasn't even a Diocese of Cincinnati. We were still part of the Bardstown, Kentucky Diocese. Then 1820, the entire state was the Diocese of Cincinnati. Then in 1847, the northern half becomes the Diocese of Cleveland, and the southern half remains the Diocese of Cincinnati. And so we were part of that Diocese of Cleveland from 1847 on. So the records that are at the parishes remain at the parishes. But diocesan records, when someone asks a question about a priest, we're interested in, our parish is 100 years old now. We want a photograph of all of our priests. Well, I have to get some of them from the archives of the Diocese of Cleveland, because if they died before 1943, their records are there. If they died after 1943, their records are with us. So it depends on the record. They still have a good bit. And then their archives is wonderful with sharing with us. So, for instance, the archivist there digitized a photograph album that the Diocese of Cleveland made in the 1890s of every church, sister's residence, and priest residence. And so she sent it to me, and I identified all of them that were ours. And so then she was able to know those identifications. And so it helped her and it helped us, because now we have an image of everything that we had in 1890. So it's nice to have that cooperation. Thank you, that's a really good question.
Maybe you already answered what happened to the school, St. Columba.
Oh, the big brick one?
Yeah.
That got torn, in 1952, when the new one was built, that one got torn down.
Regarding the schools, you talked about all the history of the churches in the diocese. What about the school records? Where are they? Are they demolished? Are they still around?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that is also on a case-by-case basis. So as schools were closing, very often those records went into the parish office, and sometimes they were lost. Because our schools have been closing since the 1970s. I was fortunate when we were collecting the St. Stanislaus records that there were a number of them that were preserved in the parish office. And the school's office has some, and we're trying to track down where a lot of them went. And you'll say, it's in our records that it's in the parish office, and the parish's office is saying, I don't know where they are. So, yeah, that could be a victim of a clean out. And they said, oh, school's closed, we don't need these anymore. Yeah.
The diocese is obviously like an English muffin. There's a lot of nooks and crannies around for the butter to hide in. I'm from St. Cyril's, which is where my home parish is, and I see a lot of our members there.
St. Cyril.
St. Cyril and Methodius in Youngstown.
Youngstown, okay.
The home of the St. Vincent de Paul soup kitchen at this
time.
And there's a complete photographic record of all of the students who attended there on the walls down there just yet.
Oh,
you may want to get those copied and moved and preserved, but my dad is in one picture, and I'm in one of the other pictures.
Oh, that's neat. And where exactly is it?
It's in the basement. They're on the walls.
Downstairs? Okay.
Downstairs in what was then the parish hall.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
And I remember the night of the fire. There was a thunderstorm. I was a little guy. I was a bit afraid of the storm, so my dad took me aside, sat me down, and was reading the funny paper to me when we heard the fire engines.
Oh, wow.
And we heard the fire engines. And we heard the fire engines.
Oh, wow.
My dad said, this must be something big. We lived on the near south side, so we had a window that faced north toward the steel mills. He ran upstairs and he said, oh, there's a big fire on the north side. And he says, it looks like it's near the cathedral.
Oh,
he
wow.
says, I hope it's not the cathedral. And then at the 11 o'clock news at night when they came on, because there was no news in between, it was 6 and 11. You didn't get any postings or bulletins in those days. We found out that it was indeed the cathedral that was gone.
Yeah.
If you'd like me to put that to paper and store that in an archive, I can do that for you.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot of records for Canton and Youngstown. Are there a lot of records for the Portage Deanery by chance?
Well, every parish has a parish record. So there are boxes and boxes and boxes of parish records. So yes, from every deanery, every parish. But whether what you're looking for is in there would remain to be seen.
Is it better to give the records to the church that you belong to, or to the diocesan archivist?
Ooh, that's a hard question for me to answer. I would say give them to the parish if you feel assured that it would be preserved. I've had people bring me things that say, I know if I bring this into the office, they're going to throw it away. I think it's best to have them in the parish because then you have your whole parish memory there. But if you feel that it wouldn't be cared for, then I would be happy to take it.
The reason why I ask is I gave some records to the parish and it was just added to a stack.
Oh,
And I was just afraid that it would get lost. And so that's why I'm asking the question. Also, would you like personal pictures of baptisms and things, or like NCCW, National Council of Catholic Women pictures that are identified?
Yes, I was going to say if they're identified, we know who's in them, dated, what the event is. Yes, those are valuable. Usually, you know, like parish picnic, we don't know what year it is, we don't know who they are. Not so valuable, but yes. In fact, just this morning I left one of our seminarians cataloging some Catholic Women's Association, like 1940s records. So yeah, those are important. But to say that there's a stack of records, that doesn't mean that they're going to get lost, because we have stacks of records. It just means maybe they haven't gotten to it yet.
I really was looking forward to your talk, and before the Catholic Exponent ceased publication, I kept this from September 2nd, 2022 to make sure that I attended your talk. And I really, really enjoyed it because just like you said, it's a healthy community if we have healthy minds and healthy history. And if we're not aware of history, we're going to repeat it.
Yeah.
The good and the bad.
Yeah.
So thank you.